we doing it big. Yeah, exotic chicks and damn they bad. AK the king, Marie the queen. Okay, yeah, we rep the sports and breed the team. We plugged in, we doing it big. Yeah, exotic chicks and damn they bad. AK the king, Marie the queen. Okay, yeah, this is plug music. For the pin and the black top, never wrong, we straight drop. Put on for your city outreaches worldwide. No haters, out love. You wanna put on, prove just pull up. Historian out trust. Created the space to build with our love.
Hey, what's up? Good. This your girl Madi from the Plug magazine. We got an exclusive interview with EI the King. So EI the King, what's up?
What's going on? Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be on, and looking forward to it.
Yeah. So tell our audience who you are and where you from.
Yeah. Long story short, my name is EI the King. That's my artist name. My real name is Stephen Testa. S25781 for all my fellow convicts.
There
Over
you
12
go.
years in the chain gang in the state of Florida. That's where the Lord ultimately transformed my life. I'm from H-Town, Houston, Texas originally, but
Hmm.
I'm Florida raised. South Venice, V-Town, Laurel Bound. But I currently reside and live in Tampa, Florida.
Yeah, it looks really nice out there today.
Yeah, beautiful out here.
I think it's cloudy for us here in Chicago today, but
Yeah,
the weather is so bipolar over here. It might be sunny in an hour or something.
yeah,
So, I want to, again, I want to say thank you for doing the interview because, you're a Christian artist. Because of some of the entertainment content that we have in the magazine, they don't want to be associated with it. But you know what I mean? However, like our audience, a lot of the people are incarcerated. So I feel like the gospel needs to be reached to those people who are locked up. You know what I mean?
of course, of
And
course.
so, so thank you for taking the time to do this interview because we're trying to, you know what I mean, enlighten and inspire those guys behind the walls, you know what I mean? And as
For
you
real.
know, they're not gonna just get a magazine where it's all about Christian because they're not about that life, right? You gotta cater to them to what their interests are, right?
Sure.
So as you know, in that environment, certain music gets glorified. You know what I mean? The same type of music, lifestyles that got them locked up, right? So
Yeah.
how has your music been tailored for those locked up that they can relate to it?
Yeah, for sure. I think number one, it always boils down to authenticity.
Hmm.
People can feel, people can sense, people can tell when someone's being genuine. And
Hmm.
so as an artist, I've always been a creative. I've always just wanted to be authentically me. So I think that the majority of the music that I wrote, my first album I wrote while I was incarcerated. So my
Okay.
first album when I came home that was released, 90% of it was written while in prison.
Hmm.
So, I was writing from a place of incarceration, of
Hmm.
not being able to see my kids or
Right.
seeing the distance of my kids, of being in prison for so long and them being born when I was in prison and them growing up when I was in prison. So, of course, and then even after the album, still now today, of course, I'm continuing to just narrate, my journey and my transition home. But I still know that the only reason why God's, just elevating the platform and opening up doors for me in the industry ultimately is to be an example and just a template of inspiration to those who are in the chain gang. Like, look, I'm just like you,
Hmm.
forever convict. And if God
Right.
can do it in my life, he can do the same in yours and more. So, of course, I always want to stay tapped into my why. And part of
Hmm.
my why is just like the Lord transformed my life in the chain gang, set me free, and I'm walking in the purpose that he has for me. I want to see other men and women, experience the same fulfillment of life and them tap into the purpose and identity of who God has called them to be as well.
Yeah, I agree. And I think everybody who's in the environment, so chaotic, there's so much going on that, you know what I mean? Like, that's their world, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's all they know. That's all they know. And that's, you know what I'm saying? How did you get into the music industry? Like, how did you start doing that?
Yeah, I've been rapping my whole life.
Hmm.
I've always been a communicator. That's just like was a natural gift on my life. I was a captain of the football team my whole life. Sports was my purpose when I was a kid till I got caught up in the streets.
Yeah.
So when I started going to juvenile programs and juvenile detention, of course, just being caught up in the street lifestyle and then being influenced by hip hop culture, I'd
Hmm.
always be like freestyling, like in the hood on the corner
Right.
selling dope with all the homies, and and
Yeah.
it was just, it was fun. But whenever I started going to juvenile programs, I started venting through music. And I think I really started with poetry. DMX really impacted my life as a
Mhm.
kid. So I started writing poetry as a kid. And then as I got older, I started going to the studios. Like, when I was still in the streets, just rapping trap music, I was still authentic and sharing my lifestyle, but it wasn't empowering. So it wasn't until, that I got saved and I gave my life to Jesus and God began to transform my life. God showed me that the gift that he gave me was to empower the streets, was to
Yeah.
empower people and to share my story. So when I was incarcerated, man, God just began to use me to really proclaim the gospel through music. And then when I came home, God gave me a huge vision when I was in prison. God showed me he was going to use music to reach the streets with the gospel, and
Mhm.
that ultimately God was going to blow me up in the music industry for one
Mhm.
purpose, and that's to reach the streets with the gospel, but also to scale ministry. So my first
Okay.
song that was released after my third month out got me signed by the second biggest Christian hip hop label in the nation.
Oh wow.
Yeah, so it's been a journey since, and I know it's only been just the hand of God just opening up every door, and it's been an amazing journey. It's been
Yeah.
beautiful, and yeah, so that's how it all began.
Yeah, and I think that shows, what happens when you surrender to him, right? You know what I mean? That we as humans, we have the tendency to want to take control of things and
Yeah,
be like, well, I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that, but we forget that, you know what I mean? He's the planner of planners, and at the end of the day, you know what I mean? Like he's got, like you said, a purpose for us, you know what I mean? And we need to start like letting go and surrendering to what our real true calling is, So, can you share an experience that enlightened you to change your life around?
yeah, yeah. Man, I think just like every other American, man, like I was never brought up in church. I
Mhm.
never wanted to be no Jesus freak. I thought Christians were kind of
Same.
weird.
Yeah.
I remember like being in high school and I seen like the Christians pray around the flagpole, like, and I
Or
thought that was just
knocking on the
weird.
doors.
Yeah, that was just weird to me. You know what I mean? But God was always drawing me. I think I went to a church service when I was 9. I heard the gospel, like, and they asked if anyone dies tonight, if they don't know if they're going to heaven, raise your hand. So I was scared. I raised my hand. It took me in the back, and had me pray the sinner's prayer and gave me a Bible. And like it was in my head, but it never really hit my
Mhm.
heart until I was 18 years old in the county jail. I was going to prison for my first time, and one of my cellies, he was a big town dope boy from a different city, and he was fighting his case for about 2 years in the county jail. And it was somebody who had a voice, somebody who I would listen to. And I remember I was a hot headed jit. I wasn't friendly. I really didn't want to talk with him or nobody. But I noticed he never ate his trays. I didn't realize it because he was fasting, but also I noticed he was always
Mhm.
reading the Bible. And I remember after a couple of nights, he had me sit down and he shared with me his story about how, he gave his life to Jesus and God transformed his life while he was in the county. And he had me read in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 6, verse 24, that no one can serve two masters. You either love the one and you hate the other. You cannot serve both God and money. And for the first time in my life, God like
Mhm.
removed the blinders from my eyes. And I realized that, man, Jesus, like he wasn't my God. My God was myself. My God was money. And I realized that, man, like, that I was, broken and I needed a savior. So that night I genuinely committed my life to Jesus. And from that point on, my life has forever been changed. But I always share with that story of my testimony. The very next morning, I got in the grid. You know what I mean? I got in the
Oh,
fight. And I
yeah.
reason why I say that is because that became a snapshot of how the rest of my spiritual journey would be. It'd be very chaotic. I would
Mhm.
run a lot. I went to prison 3 times after that.
Mhm.
So I just kept running from God. But man, that's what
Yeah.
God in His love. He always pursues us. He restores us. He even chastises us. But finally, the last bit is whenever I just, man, fully surrendered, and God
Yeah.
just really began to show me my purpose and calling. And when I began to like enjoy Jesus more intimately and walk in my calling, that's when everything really began to change.
Yeah, and I feel like once you because once you start getting closer and doing positive, I feel like that's when the enemy attacks the most. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, what was the most challenging aspect of your transition? Like, how did you overcome it?
In prison or out here?
Like, just in general, like, you know what I mean? Because you know what I mean. Like, you went in. You had three different times where you got locked up. So
Yeah, yeah,
you know what I mean. So I guess what was so challenging about being able to, I guess, surrender. You know what I mean?
yeah.
How did you overcome it?
I think for me, I really love the streets.
Mhm.
I think I just love the street lifestyle. It was a sense of fulfillment for me. I think
Mhm.
I always felt rejected as a kid. So I felt
Mhm.
like I was always, my whole life, I was always trying to prove myself to everybody.
Mhm.
I grew up small. I hit puberty late. So I always had a chip on my shoulder. So like in the streets, I kind of sought fulfillment through street prestige, and just trying to
Right.
seek validation, especially as a young kid, like, and my father not being in the home, like looking for validation from like the older dope boys and things like that.
Mhm.
So I think it was whenever God began to show me my calling and my purpose and the leadership traits that He gave me, really to like empower people and to be vocal about my faith and to really like to like in the chain gang, like God would always use me in gangland. You know what I mean? Like I never
Mhm.
banged or nothing, but like I was never scared or timid, and God would always stir me up to be in the midst of a hostile environment to really, share the gospel and just be authentic and build relationships with people and to see people change and find faith in Jesus. When I began to walk in that gift and that calling that God placed on my life, I think that was the game changer for me.
Mhm.
And especially whenever I came home and God gave me a vision in prison, and God gave me a blueprint, a template for my release. And when I began to walk in it, that was the change. Because
Yeah.
every other time I would come home, I would start trying to go to church at first, but
Mhm.
slowly but surely, it started off with messing with a whole bunch of girls, and then like
Yeah.
I'm trying to work a regular job, but I feel like a lame because I don't got no money. And,
Yeah.
it's like I want my spot back in the streets, so I
Right.
would immediately like go back to the streets selling dope and get caught right back into that street lifestyle. And it did
Yeah.
nothing but lead me to prison every time again. So
Yeah.
I think when I began to walk in my purpose that God had for me, that was the game changer.
So going back to the girls, were you when you were in prison? Did you ever get into prison relationships?
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, yes and no.
Mhm.
Because throughout my prison experiences, that's where God was transforming my life.
Mhm.
So it was me really just being tempted
Mhm.
and pursuing the fantasy and getting caught up in the chain gang romance with the women
Mhm.
officers. But now, like, I was genuinely following Jesus. So
Yeah.
like I never, like, had sex with an officer. There was
Yeah.
times where I had opportunities, but I would,
Mhm.
walk away from the temptation, and
Yeah.
but I did, like, fall into some stuff. So
Mhm.
it was a temptation, yes.
Yeah, because there's a lot of guys who get into like prison relationships, or they meet pen pals, and they're selling the dream, but they're really there
Yeah.
just need money for the books type of thing. You know
Yeah,
what
yeah.
I mean? So,
Oh yeah, I fell in love. Hold on. Yeah, yeah. I didn't think it. I was only thinking about women officers. Yeah, I fell in love
oh
with
yeah,
my pen pal. Yeah, we
yeah,
started the marriage paperwork and everything. Yeah, I swore that was gonna be like the wife God had for me, and this is my last bid before I came home. And then 19 months left on
yeah.
my sentence. She cheated on me, ghosted me, got pregnant. Yeah,
Well,
So yeah, it
that's
was that was,
messed up.
but it was God protecting me. It was God letting it happen before I came home. So
I
I'm thankful
agreed.
for it.
Agreed. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's true. They say that. You know what I mean? Sometimes that things happen for a reason, right? You know what I mean?
for sure. For sure.
So, if you can give advice to a younger version of yourself, knowing what you know now, what would that
Mhm.
be?
Simple. And not to sound like
Hmm.
I'm saying it's some type of Christian cliche, but this like
Yeah.
the reality behind it. Number one, like God sees you. God loves you, like for real. God's with you, and God has a huge purpose upon your life. I think one of the greatest wounds that any man or woman throughout humanity has is we like subconsciously lack a sense of worth.
Hmm.
And I think throughout the majority of my adolescence and my teenage years and young adult years, I didn't love myself. I didn't realize I was loved. I always felt less than. And that caused me not to care about myself, which caused me to crash out. I didn't care. Um, so number one, like when we truly identify that we are loved by God ultimately, and I would just, tell myself like, yo, like God's got a huge purpose on your life, man. And I feel like that's a huge need that, all, everyone needs. We need people speaking life into us. And
Hmm.
especially when
Agreed.
people come from broken homes and people come from hostile upbringings, that's something that's needed is we need men and women and mentors to really speak life into
Right.
people, so
Agreed.
I would just speak life into myself, and I would point out my gifts and my leadership
Yeah.
traits, and I would just really affirm myself.
Yeah. So for the guys and the ladies behind the walls, if you had one sentence with words of wisdom for them, what would that be?
God has purpose for you right where you are in the midst of
Mhm.
your incarceration. Like, don't get me wrong, we should be we should be wise and ask God to prepare us for our release, but we don't want to be too overly focused on the release that we forget about the purpose and why God had us where we are right there. And number
True.
one, that's to authentically encounter Jesus, but also too that God would use us there.
Hmm.
So that they would tap into it, that they would tap
Yeah.
into it in the midst of their incarceration.
And I think you probably experience like guys who are locked up and then they're trying to change their ways, but because of their past, because they're either a leader or from an organization or prison from prison gangs or whatever it is, that kind of keeps biting them back in the butt, and they keep getting cases or going to lock up, but they're really trying to change within, what I'm saying, within
Mm.
themselves and within prison, you know what I mean? But something always comes back
Yeah.
and keeps them down, and it kind of like unmotivates them, you know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
So what do you got to say to them?
I will use kind of like maybe an example when it comes to music. This is the first thing that came to my mind, right? I
Yeah.
tell people all the time, I tell aspiring artists, talent gets people's attention.
Hmm.
Number one is obedience to Jesus. God opens up doors. God's favor goes before us. But also too, that like when it comes to what we can do, our responsibility, it's the people who don't quit that make it in the industry. So I would
Hmm.
say that that's a life principle, especially for like people who are caught up in their gang affiliation, or people who feel like I felt the same way. I used to always believe a lie. Tiger will never change his stripes, and I felt like that was all I was ever gonna know. So I would just encourage those men and women like, okay, you're not going to get it right all the time. You're going to struggle
Hmm.
with things. You're going to fall, but that's okay. We all do. You know what I mean? But get up and keep going. Don't stop. Be consistent and just keep authentically chasing after Jesus. And, like you'll get it right. God will get you right in due time. Just don't give up.
Yeah. So what projects are you working on right now?
Yeah, I just released my last project. It was an EP. It was called Forever Convict. And that is a project I'm going to release every year, primarily just to always tap into my why. So every lyric of that song, every music video is all specifically catered to the incarcerated population. Because, like I
Mhm.
mentioned, that's where God transformed my life. And I want to always create music specifically for those who are incarcerated. So that was my
Yeah.
last project. It's called Forever Convict. The biggest single on it is called FOF with me and Project Pat. And I got a upcoming EP dropping in about a couple months. So I haven't released anything yet. But just
Okay.
because this is going into the prison system, I'll go ahead and release the title. It's called Real Relationships. And I'm
Hmm.
beginning to share my journey about coming home and especially wrestling with relationships with women
Yeah.
and the
That's a good one
challenges
right there.
of it. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Well, okay, so the Forever Convict, does that have what is it? One day in a thousand?
Oh no, day one and then day 1000, day 2000, all that's on my first album. It's called The Incarceration. The
Oh,
Incarceration
okay.
Part 4, the end. Yeah, so that was that I released all that stuff last year and the year before.
Yeah, that's AK's favorite song right now, Day 1000.
Oh yeah,
And
free AK man. Shout out to AK man.
thanks you. Yeah, man, he hopefully makes parole this month, you know what I mean? But you already know the prison system always got their own plans and they do what
Yeah,
they want to do, right? So,
yeah,
but yeah, and I checked it out, Day 1000. I'm like, yeah, I understand why he would, you know what I'm saying? Like
yeah,
he that's his favorite jam right now, you know what I mean?
yeah,
So,
yeah.
we're just trying to get him a tablet because now you know how some facilities have tablets.
Uh,
So once they get broken, you got to get replaced or whatever. But
oh yeah.
yeah. So do you want to send any shout outs to anybody?
Yeah. First and foremost, man, shout out to all the men and women who are incarcerated throughout the nation and throughout the world.
Mhm.
Specifically, I'm always going to favor the Florida Chain Gang a little bit more
Mhm.
because I'm Florida Chain Gang raised. So
Yeah.
shout out to Marcus Cray, Dennis Rufner, Gary Farrington, Bless, LP. Shout out to my dog Big Jeezy at Polunsky Unit in Houston while in Texas. And man, just shout
Mhm.
out to everybody throughout the Chain Gang, man, who's realizing that it's not dead time. That God got
Mhm.
purpose for you in the midst of the incarceration. To stay encouraged in the midst of the chaos. Man, there's purpose for you in the midst of it. In due time, God will pop the gate. Just stay focused in the meantime and allow all that pain and all that chaos to be fuel to drive you closer to Jesus, number one, but also two, to continue to arise you that God would make you to be the man that he called or the woman that he called you to be.
Yeah. So make sure you guys check out. Can you shout out your social media accounts?
Yeah. EI the King underscore on Instagram, EI the King underscore on TikTok. EI the King on YouTube. I also have 2 podcasts. Let Me Talk Bro is on the EI the King channel on YouTube. I have the Incarceration podcast that's on YouTube as well. It's all about
Okay.
prison and crazy prison stories.
Yeah, you guys gotta
Yeah,
check that out.
yeah. So,
Yeah, and like I said, thank you for the interview for the Plug magazine. You know, we appreciate it. And you know, it's AKM for life over here. So either you get down, stay down, or move around.
there you go. Thank you so much for having me. Big shouts out to the Plug magazine. Love what you guys are doing. And I genuinely appreciate this for having me.
All right. Well, thank you. And everybody, make sure you tap in, follow. If you haven't checked out his music, make sure you check it out. So we out.
There you go. Peace.
Free AK, AKM Publishing.
It's that AKM music, man.